Cool. My name's Benni Allan. I'm the director of EBBA, and today I'm going to talk about buildings of empathy. I did break the rules a little bit. So we've worked on about 180 projects in 8 years. 25% of those have not completed, they paused, they stopped, which works out about 17 a year. And this is kind of a snapshot of what we've got going on at the moment, a varied set of projects from buildings and interiors through to furniture and light installations. In preparing for this talk, New Architects, I wanted to pull together a list of these projects to see what connects them. While varied, it's that variety that continues to push us and keeps that appreciation of learning, which ultimately keeps us young. After 8 years, that feeling of new still prevails. It's not something I imagine will leave us as a practice soon, especially as the average age of the studio is still around 30. Speaking of which, it would be wrong to talk about EBBA without thanking the amazing people, past and present, that have been on this journey. EBBA's never been about single voice, and it certainly wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for all the support and the contribution from these amazing voices, most of which are New Architects themselves, including the photographers who helped document and curate the spaces we design. It's interesting to be talking about the practice and to consider it in the context of what it means, a new architect. Although we're getting very much closer to a decade in practice, I don't go a week without reflecting on who we are, what we've done, and what we could be doing better. Better as architects making buildings, but also contributing to a better world. Making a more sustainable future is such a big issue, and things are constantly changing so much that it always feels like we're approaching it fresh. Happy Earth Day, by the way. So for us, New Architects means the creative potential of being naive and an energy and drive to make. The ability and interest in experimentation, as most of the time we're still figuring it out. Being able to work at the juncture of art, architecture and fashion, because those are the worlds that we live in, and a social and community focus where the experience of those who use our buildings come first. And lastly, being young means that you can make your own rules. Tonight, I'd like to focus on one key area which I believe carries through a lot of our work, the idea of buildings that have empathy and a desire to provide moments of generosity. Before I talk about working on this building in Germany, I'm going to break the rules and share a very quick intro to two of our projects that define the start of EBBA. As a practice, we've delivered work on incredibly tight projects, and for years we've had to try to make the most of every project through the simplest of means. Often the choice of materials are dictated by the tiny budgets, and instead of choosing materials for their innate visual properties, appearance, we look for materials that could be cheaply adapted to give us something entirely new. So this is La Falda. I was born and brought up in Spain, so the terracotta tiles are synonymous with the area of this region. And this is the first school building that I used. I was 3 years old, and it was still standing, and I remember talks about what was going to happen with the building, and they said they were going to demolish it. So instead I said, why don't you let us come up with some ideas and we'll try and give the building a new lease of life. So we did testing over the years, found recycled bitumen panels, and we painted them in different colours of red that represent that terracotta pattern. And when the teachers saw these drawings, it reminded them of the Spanish dresses, hence the name La Falda. And I'd previously worked at Neil McLaughlin. I'd also been to the Bartlett, where you produce an obscene amount of work to deliver a building or an idea. So this project was presented with 2 drawings, which just explain what the idea was and how it was going to be built. We built it as a self-build. It cost £1,000 to do this. That was the budget. So I went there with a group of students and did the project ourselves. And it was in this process of experimentation that we actually found the subtleties in the different shades, which moved away from the original idea of this patchwork. We just really liked that subtle quality, that kind of texture and pattern that it picked up. And I think the nicest moment of this project is the fact that the children thought they'd been given an entirely new building. The second project is a nursery in Manchester. This is the unfolded extension. It's in an area that's quite deprived. Taylor Wimpey had developed the site. They kept 2 of the original buildings, the original hospital and the small gatehouse that we worked on. The rest of the site was these kind of copycat, semi-detached housing that you see across all of the UK, which some politicians think is the best quality housing we can deliver. This is the site. It's on a corner, very prominent. This was a really exciting opportunity to be able to extend a building. We had to double its size. We had a very good response from planning early on. And early on in my kind of ideas developing things within architecture, I was really interested in the work of Shinohara. So very different context, but I think similar restrictions. In Japan, they could build very little, so they were testing a lot of ideas on domestic projects. And this was using ideas of generosity and structure, so separating it to give something really dynamic. We were doing it on an entirely different scale and a very different kind of program. But the building was all about creating moments of generosity within it, spaces that the kids could climb into, playing with the height of the ceiling to make very tall spaces. And this is kind of an intro into the way that we work. I heard a interview by Miralles where he talks about the idea of prototyping and model making. If you don't make a model, the building often is the prototype. So the modeling process helps us to test ideas and develop the way that we work. So this is the result. This was probably 2 years after starting the practice. We'd sort of learned a lot about different staining techniques, trying to use incredibly cheap materials to make something really special. The kind of banding that you see in the cladding mimics the red banding that you see on the base. And again, internally, we wanted to be quite playful. So we kind of create this moment where you had the tallest point in the roof, which meets walls. We had this kind of strip of grey that was more playful. It was a nursery that didn't want necessarily colour. They wanted the colour to come from the children and their activities. And here are just some more examples of how we tried to push the idea of how the building was put together incredibly cheaply. We built this for £750 a square metre. To put that into context, an extension in London starts at about £3,000 a square metre now. And the result is a building that has this kind of tent-like form that connects with the context. It's a building that the kids can connect with. They understand what the shape of a house is, and it's something that's kind of been very successful. So moving on to working in Europe, as a practice, we have an interest in housing. It's very complicated to get work as a young practice in housing. So we moved to Europe. We looked at Germany. We actually applied for 3 competitions and we won all 3. But interestingly, the system in Germany means that the top 3 can still bid for the contract. So unfortunately, the first 2 we didn't get, and these are 2 images of the first 2. But the good news is that since 2022, we've been basically working on a digital board like this with our partners in Berlin and in Edinburgh. And it's been a really interesting process to work on this project. It's a community building. It has 27 flats. On the ground floor, it has assisted living for people with dementia. There's a multi-generational room which doubles up as a book club, and there's a GP practice in the smaller building. Rosshampton is dominated by this typology. Everything looks like this, and what's incredible about these buildings is that they serve both as a house but also as a commercial building, and often you'll have 3 generations living in one house, so they often kind of extend, so you get these different growths. This is the site, and something only because we were working with a German practice, there's very clear laws about how big a building can be and how far it can be from a boundary, which is very different to working in a context like the UK. I'd say it's more successful because it means that the limits are set and then you just have to work with those. So essentially there was only one way that this project would work. We were given a brief that it's very clear on how many units we had to serve, including how much ancillary space we needed. And so the building ended up being like this. Out of 20 submissions, only 2 of us figured out this formula. And I think that's probably one of the reasons we might have won. So this idea of generous elevations came through very early on. So you have this church building here, which was very important. And the distinction between black and grey is between housing and commercial. So we wanted to create this relationship between these 3 buildings. As it's very much a barn typology in this area, we thought we'd build a barn, but a very unconventional barn, where we wanted to create this open, lively elevation that created a public space in front of the building. But more interestingly, we cut the building up, so it essentially worked like a series of staggered terraces that would offer public routes and connections within the building. Added to that is the importance of these community and care spaces. So these blocks are public and they're sort of shared and in between them are housing. So I won't go into the landscape design because it's a very big building, there's lots to talk about, but the importance of the gardens is significant because of the elderly and assisted living for people with dementia. So the landscape design tries to support that. So these two buildings, one of them acts as the kind of the main node, and can I use the mouse? Oh. Can I use the mouse? So at the top of the plan, where you see the larger space is the multi-generational room, and this was a space that is very important for the town. This is the biggest building that the town will ever build. It's a very important project for the mayor. I think total value will be about 8 million euros, which is 4 times more than any building that's been built in this region. But it's really needed. They need the additional care homes, they need the additional spaces for the community. So in the long building, you have the community centre, then you have assisted living on the right, with in between a communal room for those receiving elderly care. The smaller building has a GP practice on the ground floor and then housing above. This kind of idea of these generous connections happens at all parts of the building. So even though it's a barn, it has these open terraces that connect different parts of the site, particularly to the garden. So it means there's active frontages at all times. On the first floor, you have this large gangway, which doubles as an extra terrace. It can be a space that people can hang out on, meet your neighbours. It means that you can connect to the building opposite. And this is an idea also where we started to think about the construction of the building and how we could sort of split the outside and the inside. So you have these incredible moments that from the top level you can see all the way down to the garden, and these really enjoyable moments where people can sit outside. And the top floor, the most significant move was to actually create these winter gardens that sit at the top of the building. At competition stage, we had 2 of them. You can see it in the top right. Unfortunately, the project wasn't viable without getting one more flat. So we lost the second winter garden, but it still gives benefit to all of the residents. And those spaces are actually then connected to some of those living accommodation as well. What's nice is you start to read some of those generous spaces in the section. So you get a double height space on the left for the community multi-generational room. You have the winter garden above. And then at all times, you have these open elevations that kind of face 2 sides of the site. In section, very small, but you also get that kind of generosity with double height spaces, these communal spaces that will allow people to congregate and meet their neighbours. And the flats above, benefiting from the tall heights, also have this incredible balcony to create very bright interiors. This is the second building. I won't go into it in too much detail, but we tried to make really generous apartments that all have wheelchair access. They have their own balconies. So at all times thinking about those individual accommodation as well as the global. So this is really a multi-generational building under one roof. It has access to for wheelchair users in the assisted living accommodation to have their own doors that lead out to the gardens. The idea originally was to have this kind of semi-open facade that really celebrated this end gable because we wanted to create that relationship with the church. And then we were sort of thinking about how do we reduce the expression, how do we reduce cost? And these are some of the beautiful photographs of Bern and Hillebecker from Germany, where it really is a reduction in structure. And similarly, I've always loved the sketches by Peter Markley, where he reduces a simple idea into its basic forms. So the top left-hand image was the competition scheme. And then at one point we thought, why don't we just remove the facade entirely? Partly for costs, but also because it really creates this incredible moment where you'll see the life of the building. The size of the structure is pretty substantial on the left. So the bottom right is actually what we would have got away with. But we sort of started to sort of test different ideas which felt too filigree. And going back to Markley, we thought, how do we make a building where the simple expression of how things come together is the architecture? And similarly, you have this kind of open frame for a lot of the public spaces that happen above. But we're interested in this idea of bringing in further texture, partly because it's cheap. In Germany, 90% of the buildings are rendered. So their technology and their advancements and interesting ideas that they develop in texture is much further than the UK. So we really wanted to kind of bring in this idea into the building. So what you get is a very heavy rusticated base, and then what you see in timber is actually stepped back. So this idea where we wanted to spend more money where people are going to engage with it most. So the spaces that people hang around with and have access to their main front doors will be lined in timber. These moments of generosity can really be felt in the housing and the elderly care. So you have these double height spaces that benefit from lots of light. You have those connections through the building to the gardens beyond. And this winter garden, which will become this inside-outside space, sits above this incredible community room that will be used as a book club and after school for the children. So these images are a little bit out of date, but it kind of gives you a sense of some of the architecture. And really, it is a reduction of expression. The building is built the way it needs to be, and the outcome of that is the architecture. So like those initial projects I mentioned, we're really just playing with surface treatment, thinking about different stains, how you might treat timber in different ways, really trying to gain the most from this project in the simplest of means. And those communal spaces that connect above, so this is the winter garden on the left, which will be an incredible building that can, space that can be used all year round. And then the one on the right, that kind of moment where you'll have different people on different levels being able to connect and meet. So this is where we are at the moment. I was in Berlin a month ago. We're about to submit stage 4. So very exciting. We hope to be on site this time next year. And just to finish off the talk, I'd like to end with a few statements about what I think generosity and empathy mean. So I think that buildings should give back to the street. They should offer opportunities for calm and spaces for everyone to enjoy. Sustainability as care is really important, and we should be designing buildings that promote the use of natural materials and low carbon strategies. The timber for the building will be sourced within a few kilometres of the site, and this is something that we need to be doing in order to design a better future. The idea of social connection and inclusivity happens throughout this building, spaces that offer opportunities for new connections and housing types that give users the ability for direct access to common areas and green spaces. People-centred, prioritising materials where those living there will appreciate them most, materials that are good to touch and good for your health. And cultural and emotional resonance, so making buildings that fit in with the context and connect with people so they can gain a sense of authorship and agency. And a final question, is that what empathy looks like in concrete form? I'll leave that to you. Thank you.